Welcome to the first in a series of presentations covering all the basics that you need to know in order to create a website for your small business. Over the 4 episodes, we will cover everything from hosting to design and navigation, user experience, and how to maintain your website. This first episode gives an overview of how to get started. We will be focusing on WordPress, which is by far the most popular website platform. We want to teach people how to create and manage their own websites for themselves. If you'd like to learn more or to discuss other options such as Wix and Squarespace, then please contact us and we'd be happy to help. Over the next 4 sessions, we're going to look at the basics of designing a website for a small business. We're not obviously going to design a website, but we are going to cover all the things that you would need to think about and that you would need to consider if you're starting a website for your small business. I'm going to focus on self-hosted WordPress because it is the most robust in terms of business website providers. But there are others, and I will touch on them as we go, just so that we're getting an overview of everything. You can ask questions. What I'm going to cover over these 4 classes, we're going to look at how to register a domain and decide on web hosting, how to look at choosing your design, your template, the theme of it, what it's going to look like. Is it going to be magazine style? Is it going to be blog style? Is it a shop? Whatever. There's a variety of different types of theme that you can choose and how to customize it. How to think about structuring a website in terms of your page structure and menu structures, how you navigate around a site, how you help users navigate around a site, how you can add functionality like a shop, or even simple things like galleries, portfolios, that kind of thing. How to get seen, how to link your website to your social media, and a little bit about, we'll touch on SEO, which is search engine optimization, which we want to make sure that we connect to Google and then Google can actually find us. And a little bit about admin stuff, how to maintain and update your website and make sure that it's safe and secure and that you don't have any security issues on it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is choosing a website host. Now, whether you have one already or you don't have one, or you're looking at free options, you still require some kind of host for your website, even if it's a free version of software. So there's a few things to think about: how much it's going to cost you, or if you're looking to do something free. If you want to advertise or sell products or services, then that will affect what website hosting service you can use. Some of the free website services don't allow you to advertise or sell on the free option. You have to have a paid option. Do you want a custom domain, i.e. do you want yoursite.com versus yoursite.wordpress.com or yoursite.wixsite.com something else, because Wix URLs are about this long on the free version. Do you need an email address? Think about how many visitors you might get, because that affects the hosting that you might choose in terms of the size of your site, and how much you want to be able to design, how much customization you want to do to the design. You get more control the more advanced you get in terms of the website host and package that you choose. So first of all, there are free options. The big ones really are WordPress, Wix, and Blogger. Is also Google Sites, which you can use your free, if you have a Gmail email address, you can create a Google site from your personal account, which can be a good option if you're not trying to build something particularly big or complicated. But any information that you store in it will be stored as part of your free 15 gig on your personal Gmail. So if you're going to be uploading a lot of images and stuff, you'll very quickly fill that 15 gig. It's not massive, particularly if your email's in there and other bits and bobs are in there. But Google Sites is a relatively new option in terms of building a free site. Some of the limitations with free plans is that you can't use a custom domain. Generally, you'll have the .wordpress or .wix or whatever in there. Blogger's different. You can use a custom domain without having to upgrade to another plan. You have a fair amount of design options in terms of themes on a free site, but it is less than on a paid site. The design customization is a bit more limited generally. Wix has a very good drag and drop front end builder if you're looking to do something free, but it is more limited when you start trying to add extra functionality like shops and stuff. That's when it gets more complicated and it's not quite as robust as WordPress. Free WordPress, you cannot advertise, you cannot sell products. Blogger, you can. You will have adverts from the provider on your site, which is often something to have a little think about, because some of the adverts may not be appropriate to your website content. And if you ever decide to change from one to another, WordPress is definitely the easiest to migrate from one site to another. So that's another thing to think about if you want to upgrade at any point in the future to something more advanced. Then migrating WordPress to WordPress is a lot easier than migrating a different platform. WordPress and Wix both offer paid plans as well, as part of the WordPress.com engine. The WordPress version, the WordPress one is actually quite expensive for what it is. It's far more expensive than going self-hosted and managing it yourself. You are paying for WordPress to manage your site for you to a certain extent. The monthly fees for that are quite high compared to a monthly self-hosting charge. Squarespace is another one that comes into the mix at this point because Squarespace is another popular website builder. They do a free trial, but they do not have a free plan version. It is all paid to use Squarespace. It's very pretty, but you can do the same in WordPress and you get a lot more functionality with WordPress down the line. It's a bit easier to customize things. Squarespace kind of ties you into how they do things. So it's a bit harder to do things your own way if you want to. With all paid plans, you can advertise and sell through them. You get a mix of whether you get business emails or webmail, and I'll cover that in a little more detail later. Something that you need to think about is the storage in terms of how big your site might be and how many images and how much content you're going to have. For most people starting out, that's not too much of an issue. You can start on a really low plan and you'll be fine because your site doesn't have much content yet. Bandwidth is another thing to think about. That's how much the servers can cope with people visiting your site. Again, it doesn't really matter for small new sites because you're not going to have 100,000 visitors a month, so you don't really need to worry about that too much. Something you do need to think about is whether or not they provide you with a free security certificate. And all these serviced options, of course, include that as part of their plan, which is why they're a bit more expensive than the self-hosted plans. But we are going to focus on self-hosted WordPress for this. It's for any business. WordPress is used by millions and millions of businesses. It's very robust. It's been developed with flexibility and functionality in mind. The WordPress engine is very powerful, and there is a lot of extra functionality that you can add to it very easily. So that you only have the functionality that you need, which also helps speed up your site and keep things clean and tidy. All hosts offer pretty much the same thing, but there are a few things to think about when you're choosing a host. Free site migration is a thing to consider if you already have a site with another host and you want to move to a new host to get a better deal or to get a better plan with a new host. Then free site migration can be useful. But so migrating a site isn't actually all that complicated, but it's a bit scary. It's something to, if you've not done it before, it can be a bit. So if a host offers free site migration, it takes that risk off your hands. Most hosts will offer a free domain registration for the first year if it's a new site and a new domain. A bit different if you're moving from one host to another. They'll all offer some form of free webmail, but they won't all provide business email, which again, I'll explain the difference between those later. Most of them now will provide a free security certificate, but some, most notably GoDaddy, do not. And GoDaddy are one of the big ones, which I see a lot of people using, and they have a lot of hidden costs. So it's just things like that to be aware of. As we just mentioned, things like unlimited storage and bandwidth, each of them offer slightly different things here, and it's worth comparing those plans. And you also want to look at the backup provision, because some of it is quite low. You would expect that they'd give you daily and weekly backups, but not all of them do, and that's definitely something to consider. Now, as I said here, these were the top 5 at time of writing, and I checked yesterday, and GoDaddy and SiteGround have both dropped out of the top 5. SiteGround is now number 6, and GoDaddy's up at like 9 or something. And Green Geeks and DreamHost have both popped into the top 5, which is all to say that the top 10 hosts really are much of a muchness, and they move around in terms of which one's doing better on a regular basis. And sometimes it's purely how much their monthly hosting costs are at that time, because they all change them. Every so often they run special offers and then they don't. And so they move up and down in the rankings. But any one of those hosts is going to be a good host. They're fast, they're reliable, they have good customer service, they give you everything that you would need as a startup business in terms of a website host. As I said, we are going to focus on self-hosted WordPress. It just gives us the biggest view of the things that are possible with a website, because you can do the most with self-hosted WordPress. It is in some ways a little bit more complicated than some of the other options, but that's because you get so much more functionality with it more easily. It's doing a lot more for you. Okay, so I mentioned hosts and hosting plans. I often go to Hosting Facts as my first port of call when I'm looking for who are the current top in terms of their uptime and their speed and their reliability. I always look at customer service, because you want to know that if you phone them or if you have a problem, that they're going to help you. So that, because their hosts are in a lot of ways so similar to each other in terms of what they provide, things like customer service and obviously the cost at that time for the particular host, to me, are very important, because I want to know that if there's an issue, or if I get hacked, or a server goes down, or any of those things that will affect my website, that they'll respond quickly and effectively. So I pop onto these guys every few months to see who's the latest, and you can see it was last updated in February. I haven't looked at them for a little while, and the top 10 are still all the same people. They've just shuffled around inside that top 10. See if there's anything in here. So security and backups are something that you need to look at, and I'll explain the difference between them in a moment, but that's definitely something to look at what they do. And their uptime is important. You want you want your hosting plan to be fast and to have as little downtime as possible. And some hosts are better than others with that respect, particularly now as most people view websites on their mobile. Uptimes are important, and the speed of their site loading is important, because people tend to click away quite quickly on their phone if things don't load quickly. So if you don't have a domain already and you're looking to register a domain, you can buy domains from a number of domain registrars, like domains.com and namecheap.com, even Google domains. There's several places that you can buy domains. I would always recommend that if you are buying a new domain, that you buy it with your host, because it's just easier from an admin perspective. Having said that, you can repoint a domain from one host to another without too much trouble. It's changing a couple of settings in your existing host. And you can also transfer domains from one host to another, which then keeps everything in one basket from an admin perspective. So those are both things that you can do. So having your domain registered in one place and hosted elsewhere is not a big issue. So you have your domain. Now what? The first thing that you do is, all of these hosts will offer a one-click WordPress installation. Choose it. Just get them to install it. It's the quickest, easiest way. It's what you want anyway. They'll take you through a an installation wizard generally, which will ask you a few questions about your site. They may offer to install some common plugins for you. Generally, that includes things like WordPress, like Yoast and WooCommerce and Jetpack. They also may ask you to choose an initial theme or to use their own builder. A few of the website hosts like GoDaddy and people have their own like website builder, which is a quick way to get a site up and running. It can put a bunch of content onto your site that you don't want, though, because it's full of demo pages, and the demo pages all come with images and words and content that you then need to go and remove if you don't want them. So it's sometimes simpler to just install WordPress, pick a basic theme and go from there. Don't because if you want you want to decide how your website looks. So unless there's something that matches exactly what you're going to do, it can actually be faster to just do it yourself, because you do end up with a lot of extra content there that you need to go and delete, particularly images that you do not own because you don't have the copyright for them that come with some of these builders and demo themes. Your host will have a control panel. You are unlikely to have to do too much at a cPanel level. They all look a little different because it varies by host as to how they've set this up. But essentially, it gives you access to doing things like setting up webmail addresses. So that's things like info@yoursite.com, to install security certificates or to make sure that that the free one that comes with the host is installed properly. And it gives you access to the file manager and to your backups. So for example, if there's an issue on your site, if something breaks and you want to roll back, that sort of functionality is in your control panel. Now, most hosts will help you with a bunch of that. If you don't know how to do things, you can ask them and they'll talk you through working on your back end. But for the most part, you shouldn't really need to access that too much because the front end, the WordPress dashboard, is where you will do most of the things that you need to do. Occasionally, you'll need to go into it, and it's generally if something's gone wrong, which we hope doesn't happen. But you need to kind of know your way around your cPanel just so that you know what's there and how to access it. But it is different for each host. I can show you one example here. This is the cPanel for one of my websites. And as you can see here, it has things that you might need in the background. So it's the more complicated stuff that on the whole you won't need to use, but you do need to know where it is if someone asks you. If you need to do something, you can generally ask your host to help with some of the more complicated things. They'll talk you through it. So it's things like your file manager where you can access. So if you have an issue with a plugin, sometimes if you install a plugin and it breaks, the only way to get rid of it and to get back into your dashboard is to go into your file manager and delete it from there, and then you can get back into your site. So there's little things like that, which you hope will never happen. But if they do happen, you don't need to get too freaked out about it because there are other ways into your site as long as you know how to access your control panel. It's where you set up, I'm just trying to find it, emails is in here somewhere. So here's the SSL certificates. On this site, I use the Let's Encrypt free one. This is migrations here. Sometimes if you ask someone else to do some work on your site, particularly if you've been hacked, you might need to give them access through an FTP account. So there's things in here that if someone asks you a question that isn't familiar to you, it's a good chance it's something that you do in your cPanel rather than your WordPress dashboard. So I've mentioned SSL certificates a few times. An SSL certificate stands for Secure Sockets Layer. It provides encryption of data between your site and the user. So for example, if someone's entering email information or registering for something or buying something and putting credit card information in. The free providers like WordPress, etc., it's part of it's what they do. They provide that for you. When you're hosted, you need to make sure that you have an SSL certificate installed at your host level. So that's a server level thing. You don't strictly need one if you're not gathering data or transferring data in any way. However, browsers now will mark your site as insecure if you don't have one. And you'll get a little red flag in the corner. You might have seen it in Chrome where it says this site is not secure. You don't get the padlock is unlocked. And sometimes it won't even let you go to a site that doesn't have an SSL certificate because it is not as secure. Now, if it's a newsy site or a blog and all you're doing is reading content and you never have any transfer of data, it doesn't really matter particularly. So it's a little bit, the warning making people scared to go to an HTTP site is that it's not necessarily a bad thing. But if it is HTTP rather than HTTPS, don't put any credit card information into it because it's not encrypted. As a business, you need to have the S there on the HTTPS. But it really is now becoming an expectation that even if you don't need one, you have one, because your site gets flagged if you don't. And there are free options to do that. So Let's Encrypt, as I mentioned, is a free SSL certificate. The only downside with it is that it needs to be reinstalled every 90 days, which generally happens automatically, but very occasionally the auto update doesn't work and suddenly your site goes down and you're like, why is my site down? And then you realize that your SSL certificate has not updated at the end of the 90 days. I may or may not be speaking from experience on that one. So definitely when you're looking at hosts, look for one that includes an SSL certificate with it. If you don't, you're looking at probably $80 to $100 a year for an SSL certificate, which is what GoDaddy will charge you for one, because they won't allow you to install a free one. So security. So I have this conversation quite regularly with people where they say, but my host has security. And I'm like, right, so which do they have? Do they back your site up or do they have malware scanning? Which is it? Because there's often confusion as to what the security is. Is it securing my site so that if something happens, there's a backup of it? Or is it protecting my site from malicious people who might want to hack it? Now, obviously for the free sites like WordPress.com and Wix, etc., they take care of all of that because you can't add anything extra to it, and it's their responsibility because they're providing a service, and part of that service is protection of the sites. So things like backup and scanning, they will do a certain level of that. You can't really add to it because you can't add extra functionality to a free site. For a hosted site, you need to check what the host provides and then decide whether you want to belt and braces it and to add your own. Now, personally, I add a secondary layer on my sites because I don't like having all my eggs in one basket. So even if my host is providing backups and scanning, I also install something at the front end of my WordPress sites to do the same thing, so that I have, if something happens at my host end, I still have a backup of my site elsewhere. So I have like an off-site backup, for example. And I also would recommend having an element of malware scanning at your end as well, because there's nothing wrong with having more than one thing monitoring for malicious attempts to access your site, because the last thing you want is to be hacked. And again, I may or may not speak from experience on that one. It's a pain if you get hacked. And yeah, you don't want that to happen because it's quite complicated to fix. Although you can pay someone to do it, but you want to avoid that if you can. So your host will do a certain amount, and I would always recommend also doing some of it at your end as well, just so that you've got a second form of security in there. Email really depends what you need here. Now, a lot of people already have a business Gmail email address, for example, and they use that, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having that. You can also set up free webmail addresses, which are basically email, but they're in a fairly basic web-based mail provider. So there's a few different options. One of them is Roundcube. There's a couple of others. What you can do with those is you can obviously access them through your host. You just get a login for your webmail, and you log into it like you would any other email. That can be a bit of a pain if it isn't something that you normally do. So you can forward them. You can configure them to forward them to another email address that you check more often, or you can even, in some cases, add them as a mailbox into your mail manager, like you would if you've got multiple Gmail addresses. You can add multiple mailboxes to one mail manager. Most hosts will also offer some kind of business email if you require more functionality on that. If you've got more members of staff and you need more storage in your email, it really depends on the business. For most small businesses, you're going to have a single person with an email address. So if you want info@yoursite.com or contact@yoursite.com, then it's very easy to set up a free webmail address and forward that to your normal personal email so that you can keep track of it, so that if anything comes into it, you know to log into it. Equally, you can just stick with a Gmail business email address that you've been using already. If you have yoursite@gmail.com, then lots of people, certainly at a small business level, lots of people just stick with that. So again, it's just knowing the options so that you can decide which is the most appropriate for you. Thank you for joining us. Please do get in touch if you'd like help with your website. Remember, our services are free. And look out for the rest of the episodes in this series, where we'll cover design, customization, and functionality.